The chimney had not been used in 11 years. Douglas Crane had died in the autumn of 2019, and his house on Millhaven's Sycamore Road had sat empty ever since. A white two-story with a sagging porch and a kitchen that still smelled of wood smoke, though no fire had burned in it for over a decade. When the county approved its demolition in the spring of 2026, the crew assumed they would find what most abandoned houses give up: old pipes, cracked plaster, the paper ghosts of lives already moved on. What they found instead was a letter. Or what was left of one. Folded into the back corner of the chimney flue, wedged behind a damper plate that had seized shut sometime in the early 2000s, were 4 fragments of handwritten paper, charred at the edges, darkened by soot, but not destroyed. The writing was still visible, not all of it, but enough. Enough to catch a demolition worker's eye, enough to make him set down his tools and pick them up with the careful instinct of a man who understood, without quite being able to say why, that what he was holding mattered. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called the county historical office, and the county historical office made a phone call that would change everything. Because those 4 pieces of paper were not an old grocery list or a love note from another era. They were, according to investigators who would spend the next several months reconstructing them, the partial remains of a letter written in October 1997 by a 34-year-old woman named Carol Ann Merritt, a woman who had been murdered 11 days after she wrote it, in a crime that had gone unsolved for 29 years. To understand why someone tried to burn that letter, and what they were so desperate to hide, you have to go back to Millhaven the way it was in 1997. Because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Carol Ann Merritt was. Millhaven, Kentucky sits in the eastern part of the state, where the land begins to ridge and fold into the first shoulders of the Appalachians. In October 1997, it was a town of just over 3,000 people, the kind of place where the school librarian knew every child by name, where the diner on Main Street still had a pie carousel behind the counter, and where autumn evenings arrived with the smell of wood smoke and fallen leaves thick enough to feel like a season all its own. Carol Ann Merritt had lived in Millhaven her entire life. She had grown up on the same street where she would later raise her own children, just 3 blocks from the elementary school where she worked as a librarian. She was the kind of woman people described in the same breath as the town itself: patient, warm, someone who pressed wildflowers between the pages of overdue library books before she returned them to the shelf, without saying anything about it. She had 2 children, Danny, who was 9, and Emma, who was 6. She had been separated from her husband, Ray, for 14 months, a quiet and uncomplicated split that most of Millhaven quietly approved of, because Ray was not a bad man, only a restless one, and Carol Ann had handled the separation with the same composure she handled everything. She still drove Danny to soccer practice on Saturday mornings. She still set up the library's October reading display every year. Little paper pumpkins hung from the shelves with twine, the same way she had done it for 7 years running. She wrote letters. That was the thing people remembered about her most. In 1997, when the rest of the world was converting to email with the enthusiasm of the newly initiated, Carol Ann Merritt still kept a box of good stationery in her kitchen drawer and wrote longhand letters to her sister in Louisville, letters to her children's teachers at the start of every school year. Long, careful letters to the people she cared about, in handwriting her daughter would later describe as looking like something from an older century, precise and unhurried. The handwriting of someone who believed that words deserved time. She had recently enrolled in night classes at the community college in Harlan, working toward her teaching certification. She planned to finish in 2 years. She had already arranged for her neighbor's daughter to watch Danny and Emma on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. The VH tape of Danny's last soccer game was still rewinding in the machine when she got home that Friday. The children's Halloween costumes were laid out on the living room couch. She had no way of knowing that none of it would matter after the following Tuesday. The last person to speak to Carol Ann Merritt on the evening of October 28, 1997, was her sister Diane, who called at 6:22 p.m. to confirm Thanksgiving arrangements. Carol Ann sounded normal, Diane would later tell investigators. A little tired. She mentioned she had something to take care of after she got the kids to bed. She didn't say what. By 8 o'clock, Danny and Emma were down for the night. The house on Maple Street was quiet. At some point in the next 3 hours, Carol Ann Merritt was killed. Her body was found by her neighbor Gerald Hodge at 11:40 that evening. He had seen her porch light on when he walked his dog at 11, and again when he came back at 11:30. Carol Ann never left her porch light burning past 10. He knocked. No answer. He called out. Still nothing. He tried the door, found it unlocked, and found Carol Ann just inside the hallway. She had not suffered long. The medical examiner would confirm that within hours. But she had suffered, and the details of that night, the overturned hallway table, the shattered lamp, the signs of a struggle that had begun in the front room and ended near the door, made plain that what happened was not quick, and it was not random. Danny and Emma slept through all of it. The Caldwell County Sheriff's Department arrived at 11:52 p.m. This was the county's first homicide in 9 years, and deputies moved through the house with the careful attention of people trying very hard not to miss anything. In the kitchen, the kettle was still warm. In the bedroom, the children were still breathing slowly, peacefully, in the dark. In Carol Ann's purse, sitting on the kitchen counter, deputies found a sealed envelope. It was addressed in Carol Ann's handwriting to a man named Douglas Crane at 7 Sycamore Road. The envelope was empty, sealed and empty, as though she had prepared it and then removed its contents before he arrived, or as though someone else had removed them after. Deputy Alan Morse noted it in his report. He logged it, and then, in the controlled urgency of the next 72 hours, it was set aside. No one came back to it again for almost 3 decades. Detective Wayne Pruitt of the Caldwell County Sheriff's Office had been working violent crimes for 16 years when the Merritt case landed on his desk. He was a careful, methodical man, the kind of investigator who had seen what happens when a case is rushed, when evidence is misread, or suspects are eliminated too quickly in the pressure of the first days. He arrived at Maple Street the night of October 28th and stayed until dawn. His first and most obvious suspect was Ray Merritt. Ray had an alibi. He had been in Lexington for a job interview, confirmed by the hotel's check-in record and 2 colleagues. But he remained under scrutiny through most of November. He was cooperative, visibly devastated, and ultimately, in the assessment of both Pruitt and the county prosecutor, not responsible. By the end of November, he was formally cleared, which left Pruitt looking at the envelope. He interviewed Douglas Crane in the first week of December 1997. Crane was 51 at the time, a well-regarded insurance agent who had lived on Sycamore Road for 22 years, a deacon at First Baptist Church, a Little League coach, a man with 25 years of marriage behind him. In the way that Millhaven worked, he was simply not the kind of man who appeared on lists like this. His name had not come up until Pruitt traced the address on the envelope to his front door. Crane acknowledged knowing Carol Ann. Neighbors, he said. Friendly, the way neighbors in a small town are friendly. He had not seen her in several days before her death. He could not explain the envelope, perhaps, he suggested. She had been meaning to send him something relating to a neighborhood association matter they had briefly discussed. His tone was measured. His composure was absolute. Pruitt left the interview without leverage. The envelope was empty. No letter, no prints on the outside surface beyond Carol Ann's own. No witnesses placing Crane at the house that Tuesday night. Nothing in the landline records available at the time that contradicted his account. The investigation moved into 1998 without resolution. Pruitt worked 3 more leads through that spring. A transient seen near Carol Ann's neighborhood in late October. A former family dispute involving a distant relative. A convicted burglar operating in the county that fall. Every trail dissolved before it reached anything solid. By the end of 1998, the file was still officially open. But the urgency was gone, the way urgency always goes when evidence refuses to accumulate. Carol Ann's children went to live with her sister Diane in Harlan. Ray Merritt moved to Lexington. The house on Maple Street was sold the following spring to a young couple who knew nothing of what had happened there, who planted rose bushes along the front walk and painted the door red and made a life inside it. And Douglas Crane went to church that Sunday, and every Sunday after, for the next 21 years. Time moves differently for the families of the unsolved. For Millhaven, October 28 became, across the years, just another autumn date. Another day that smelled of wood smoke and cold leaves. Another Tuesday indistinguishable from the one before it. The high school rebuilt its gymnasium in 2003. The diner on Main Street closed in 2009 and reopened as a sandwich shop. Life settled around the absence the way water settles around a stone. For Diane, for Danny, for Emma, it never settled at all. By 2002, 5 years had passed. Danny was 14. Emma was 11. They were quiet children who had learned early what kind of silence certain days required of them. By 2007, 10 years. Danny had finished 2 years of college and was working construction in Lexington. Emma had started writing letters, longhand, on good stationery, without fully understanding why. She would come to understand later. By 2017, 20 years after her death, Emma organized a memorial at the Millhaven Public Library, in the reading room where her mother had spent the best years of her working life. Diane came. Danny came with his wife and 2 young children, who were small and did not understand the ceremony but sat very still throughout it. The library still had Carol Ann's original October display templates, carefully laminated and filed in a cabinet in the back workroom. A librarian who had worked alongside Carol Ann for 2 years before her death had kept them there. She had never been able to throw them out. Wayne Pruitt retired in 2011. He had carried the Merritt case for 14 years, and he left the department without having closed it, which was the only case in his career he could say that about. He kept a copy of the file in a box in his garage, organized the way he organized everything, with the careful precision of a man who had not made peace with leaving something unfinished. He reviewed it occasionally. He had no new ideas. He had never stopped believing that the empty envelope meant something. That letter existed, he told his daughter once, in one of his last years of good health. Carol Ann wrote it, and someone took it out of that envelope before we ever saw it. That's all I know for certain. Everything else is still dark. The reward poster that Carol Ann's sister had placed in the library window in 1998 had faded to the pale suggestion of a photograph by 2015. Nobody took it down. Every case on this channel represents weeks of research, verifying facts, and piecing together real lives that deserved better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, take a second to like and subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now let's get back to Carol Ann. The case had been cold for 29 years when a demolition crew arrived at 7 Sycamore Road. Douglas Crane had died in October 2019 at 73 years old. His wife Patricia passed in 2021. Their son Mark had been managing the estate since then, and in the winter of 2026 he finally arranged for the old family home to be cleared and demolished, a decision he had delayed for reasons he could not entirely name. The crew arrived on a Tuesday morning in March. Standard work: asbestos check, structural assessment, staged deconstruction. The house had sat sealed for 7 years, and it had the particular stillness of a place holding its breath. The chimney was identified as partially blocked during the structural phase. A damper plate had seized shut, common in older homes, and when the crew's lead worker, a man named Gary Blanton, worked it free with a pry bar, a small cascade of debris fell from the flue above: soot, old mortar, ash, and 4 pieces of paper folded together. Blanton held them up to the light coming through the gap in the demolished wall. The edges were charred. Clearly, they had survived a fire before finding their way into the flue, pushed upward by heat and draft, caught behind the damper, sealed there when the plate locked closed. The inner surfaces were intact. He could see handwriting. He could make out fragments. The words "I cannot keep" and "what you did," and a date in the upper right corner, October 17, 1997, he called his supervisor. His supervisor called the county. And the Caldwell County Cold Case Unit made the connection to the Merritt file within 48 hours. The documents were transferred to a forensic preservation specialist at the University of Kentucky, who spent the next 6 weeks working with infrared imaging and chemical enhancement to recover the legible portions of the letter. The process reads the trace impression left by ink's chemical composition on paper fibers, impressions that survive even after the visible surface of the paper has been damaged by heat and soot. It is the same technology used to recover messages from burned historical documents, and it works precisely because fire, despite appearances, rarely destroys everything. What she recovered was not the full letter, but what remained was enough. The letter was addressed to Douglas Crane. The handwriting was confirmed as Carol Ann Merritt's through comparison with samples held in the library's administrative records. The portions recovered referenced a relationship of 18 months. They referenced something Crane had done. Specific language investigators declined to reproduce in full until the civil proceedings were resolved, and they told him, in the careful and unhurried handwriting of a woman who believed words deserved time, that she intended to tell the truth about all of it. The envelope's adhesive flap had been sealed by Carol Ann herself. A saliva trace survived in the fold of the adhesive strip. DNA extracted from that trace was matched against biological evidence recovered from Carol Ann's home on the night of October 28, 1997. Evidence that had been held in Caldwell County's cold case storage for 29 years. Correctly cataloged, correctly preserved, waiting for a question precisely this specific to finally answer. Detective James Holt, who ran the cold case unit, sat with the lab results for a long time before he picked up the phone. "We know what the letter said," he told a reporter after the case was resolved. "We know what she was going to tell him. And we know what he did to stop her." Douglas Crane had spent 29 years as the respected memory of a respected man. His name was on a donor plaque in the lobby of First Baptist Church. His photograph hung in the Little League coaching gallery at the County Recreation Center, alongside men who had coached hundreds of children over decades of Saturday mornings. He had been a pallbearer at 4 funerals, and a witness at 2 weddings, and a man who, by every visible measure, had moved through his community without leaving a trace of what he actually was. The truth, reconstructed from the recovered letter, from telephone records newly retrieved through updated digital archive systems, and from a witness who had waited 29 years for someone to ask the right question, was this: Douglas Crane and Carol Ann Merritt had been involved beginning in early 1996. The relationship had not been equal. Court documents filed as part of the subsequent civil proceedings described a pattern that had escalated significantly in the weeks before her death, a pattern that had frightened Carol Ann and that she had been trying to document and end for months. The letter was her attempt to do that clearly, in writing, with the language she trusted most. It told him she was ending the relationship. It told him she could not stay silent about what she had learned. And it named what she had learned. What she had learned was not only the affair. The recovered portions of the letter referenced a financial matter, insurance fraud connected to a client Crane had served in 1995, that Carol Ann had inadvertently encountered evidence of at his home during the relationship. She had kept quiet about it. She could not do so any longer. On the evening of October 28, 1997, Crane had driven to Maple Street after Carol Ann's children were in bed. His vehicle, a dark blue pickup truck well known on Sycamore Road, had been seen that night by a woman named Mabel Hodge, Gerald Hodge's mother, 81 years old in 1997, who had been sitting at her upstairs window because she could not sleep, watching the quiet street below. She saw the truck. She saw which house it stopped at. She saw it leave, after a time, without its lights on. She was 84 years old in 2026 when Detective Holt knocked on her door, and she remembered it with the clarity that certain memories hold across any length of time. She had not come forward before because no one had asked her. Because in 1997, the investigation had not yet thought to ask Douglas Crane's immediate neighbors what they had seen. By the time any investigator circled back toward him, the moment had passed, and she had assumed, as ordinary people do, that her memory was irrelevant, that if it had mattered, someone official would have already found it. "I always thought I should have said something," she told investigators. "I just didn't know who to say it to." Crane had gone inside Carol Ann's house that Tuesday evening. He had taken the letter from her. He had killed her. He had driven home, built a fire in his fireplace, a fire seen by 3 Sycamore Road residents who noted the chimney smoke on a cold October night and thought nothing of it, and fed the letter into the flames. Most of it burned, but the heat caught what remained and drove it upward into the flue, behind a damper plate that would seal closed within days. And there it rested, in the dark, through one presidential administration after another, through the births of Carol Ann's grandchildren and the retirement of the detective who had never stopped believing in it. Mark Crane, when contacted by investigators in April 2026, was fully cooperative. He had not known. He said so quietly, and then said it again. He provided everything requested without condition. A son who had spent his life in the shadow of something he had not understood, who now had to carry the understanding. The Caldwell County Sheriff's Department officially closed the Merritt case on May 14, 2026. Douglas Crane's name was entered permanently into the public record as the person responsible for Carol Ann Merritt's death. No living person faced criminal charges in connection with her murder. The financial fraud matter was referred separately. The community's reaction, when the story broke across local and then state outlets, was the particular silence of a town that has been told something it already, somewhere, suspected, followed by the letters. Letters to the editor. Letters to the sheriff's office. Letters to Emma Merritt. Emma Merritt was a librarian. She worked at a branch in Lexington, not quite 40 miles from the town where she was born, in a building where she had placed, in the window facing the street, a small framed display every October for the past 12 years. It always included a photograph of the Millhaven Public Library reading room, the one her mother had built from a collection of overdue books and paper pumpkins, and the quiet belief that the right story, placed in the right hands at the right time, could change the way a person understood the world. On the afternoon of May 14, 2026, when Detective Holt called to tell her the case had been formally resolved, Emma was alone in the library. It was a quiet Tuesday, the kind of afternoon her mother had described in her letters as the best kind, the kind where you can hear the clock. Emma said, later, that she did not cry immediately. She sat for a moment with the phone still in her hand, in a reading room that smelled like paper and dust and the particular warmth of a building that has held a lot of people across a long time. Then she got up. She went to the supply cabinet. She took out a piece of good stationery, the kind Carol Ann had always kept in the kitchen drawer, and she wrote a letter. She would not say who it was addressed to. She said only that some letters are private. The Merritt case prompted Caldwell County to establish a formal evidence preservation protocol for biological materials in all unresolved violent crimes, a policy that, as of 2026, extended retroactively to cover 14 additional cold case files in the county archive. The case was cited by name in a Kentucky State Senate hearing on cold case forensic standards in June 2026. Carol Ann's name was read aloud in that hearing by a senator from Harlan County who, as a child in 1997, had not understood why his teacher was crying when she came in one Wednesday morning, and had never entirely forgotten it. There is something particular about what fire does, or what it fails to do. It consumes what it can reach, and it drives the rest upward, into the dark, where it waits. Douglas Crane built his fire believing it was the end of the letter, the end of what Carol Ann knew, the end of the only evidence that connected him to what he had done in that hallway on a Tuesday night in October. He was wrong in the way that people are always wrong when they believe that destroying a thing destroys its truth. What survived was not everything. It never is. But it was enough. It always is, when truth has somewhere to rest. 3 questions before you go. 29 years is a long time for a community to live alongside someone responsible for something like this. Long enough that he died, never having been held publicly accountable. What does justice mean in a case like this, when its arrival comes only after the perpetrator is gone? And what do you think would have happened if that damper plate had never seized, if the letter had burned completely? Finally, Wayne Pruitt, the detective who retired with this case unsolved, but never stopped believing in that empty envelope. He passed away in 2023, 3 years before the letter was found. He never knew he was right. What do you think that means? Justice found Carol Ann Merritt after 29 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists, because truth, however long it waits, always finds somewhere to rest. If you believe that too, subscribe so you don't miss the next case. More are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.